Welcome back to Questing Beast. I am Ben, and this is our second episode of Guess the D&D Edition. And today we have 3 new fantastic guests to try and guess which D&D edition I am reading from. I have 20 randomly selected quotes from all of the editions of D&D from 0th all the way through 5th. The whole BX basic line is not included here. And our guests will have to see how many they can get correct. In our last episode, I think 12 was the most anyone got correct. But I think we may be beating that this time because we have an extra special guest, which is Mike Merles, the one of the lead creators of 5th edition D&D and 4th edition D&D. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well. I also worked on 3rd edition. So technically I worked on half the editions. So if I do terribly, it'll say a lot. Well, what was I actually doing in the coast all those years? So yeah.
We don't have a chance, but it'll be fun anyway. Are you up to anything right now, Mike? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at patreon.com/Mike Merles. It's where I'm posting some early looks at some design I'm thinking of doing. I've been working with a few different companies the past few months. I was at Wizards until last December. And then since then, I've worked with a few different companies. I worked on a reality TV show too, but nothing I can talk about yet. The things that have not yet been announced publicly. So. But yeah.
You caught my interest.
Next up, we have Seth Skorkowsky from the YouTube channel Seth Skorkowsky. How are you doing, Seth?
Hello. I'm doing great. Man, we were just talking. It's like, I think it's been like 3 years since we did a video together.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm doing great. I'm nothing much. I just make YouTube videos and bum around. I changed a car battery today. That's me.
You're more productive than I was. So yeah, good for you. And lastly, but not leastly, we have Kelsey Dionne of the Arcane Library and creator of Shadow Dark. How you doing, Kelsey?
I'm doing so well, thank you. I was not as productive today as Seth, that's for sure. But I bought a bunch of paints on Amazon. That was my day for painting minis. Very exciting. And I'm working on some Shadow Dark stuff at all times. Writing some new zines, some Curse Scroll zines, and that's kind of my next upcoming project for it. So that's my thing. That's what I've been doing.
Super awesome. All right. I will put links to everyone's things down in the description or over in the description. YouTube keeps moving the description around, but it'll be around here somewhere. And let's jump into it with our first of our 20 questions. Our first quote is short and sweet. The quote is, "The format of this book is simple and straightforward."
Let me guess, it wasn't, right? I mean, you don't say that unless it isn't. Okay, so...
It's a trap.
Ooh, yeah. Format of this book. Okay, so, okay.
I'm on Mike's side here. I think this is like someone trying to apologize in advance for the fact that it's really not simple and straightforward.
Yeah, some of these questions are quite easy. Some of them are definitely trick questions, so you never know.
All right.
I'm going, yeah.
Everyone think you got an answer?
Yeah, I think I have an answer in mind. So do we
all right, give it a guess. What do you got?
I got 1E. Because that seems like the kind of thing where, like, after everyone was complaining so much about OD&D being, like, super scattered across 8 million books, that sounds like classic, like, Gygaxian, like, apology. Like, hey, I know you're mad, but this time we got it right. And, like, there's some of that in AD&D when he's not, like, complaining about, like, how people are playing his game. He's sometimes apologizing for it. So I'm gonna guess 1E.
Okay. What's everyone else got? Going with 3 and 1.
I can't tell in this thing. Yes, 3.
That's fine.
Oh, it's like mirrored. I kind of agree with Mike's reasoning.
3 would make sense just because, there was an attempt to kind of clean everything up.
That was the first one that was really designed. Before that, it was pretty much like, okay, we're going to take this stuff from the old one. Let's kind of trim it up and shove it all in one book and throw it out there. And 3rd edition was the first time that it was designed. And it's kind of like a Merlesian sort of saying to really just kind of throw out there of like, kind of this arrogant, like, yeah, this is simple. Unlike those previous editions when Gygax only apologized. Yeah,
I see where I see where this is gonna go. Okay, like I see we're out like first question. We've already got our battle lines drawn. I can appreciate that.
So the answer, this is from 1st edition.
Oh my!
1st edition D&D. Yeah, which is especially funny because maybe in some ways it's more straightforward than 0th, but I don't know. I've tried to read first edition and it's all over the place. So that's what Gary thought it was.
That was my first. So like being 13, your brain is still like a sponge. It was like, yeah, this makes total sense. It wasn't until like Thaco had been gone for like 6 years before I finally looked at Thaco going, holy crap, they were right. This is crazy. So
all right.
It was a
Excellent.
setup.
So we have 1 point for Mike, 1 point for Kelsey so far. Let's go to our second question, which is, or our second quote. A character who suffers 50 or more points of damage from a single attack must roll a successful saving throw versus death, or he dies.
That's Zeb. That is 100% Zeb.
Something like Zeb.
Yeah, we've got the saving throw types, so we know. That it can't be third or later. So I'm going with 2E.
Yep, that's correct. It is in fact second edition. 1 point for everybody.
Yay.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Like that, I don't know if other editions before or after that had that rule where if you just received massive damage, no matter how many hit points you had or how far below 0 you got, you were just immediately dead.
It may have been in third edition. I can't remember. It sounds like at first when you were describing the rule, I thought it was third edition until you got to the saving throw part. But I'm not sure why I thought that. Like,
I agree. I think there is that.
So I learned that rule in college because I was playing my first, second hybrid thing because they were really compatible. And a player did that when I like hit them with something big. They're like, well, I have to save versus death. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it was like the opposite of what people talk about getting rules lawyered, you know, because I'm sitting there like, I just want to do a ton of damage to you guys. What are you talking about? Save versus death. Like, oh, crap.
I mean, it's smart because especially at higher levels, you just have so many hit points that like any kind of battle is just going to be a huge slog. But, you know, if you just get a dragon, he breathes right in your face, you know, you could just be dead. So you gotta keep it in mind.
I seem to remember there was that problem in third edition, which is why at first I thought this was third edition. Because I remember like high level fights, you'd be like, oh no, I have to, because I think you could take massive damage in third, but there was no save versus death. So
I think the biggest mistake was save versus death. I mean, that's such an ominous sounding term that just, I blame
honestly,
Mike.
All the old saves.
I'm just going to bust your chops.
Hey, I've earned it. Yeah.
This is going to be like actors being like,
sure.
do you remember your lines, those things? It's going to be like, Mike, do you remember when you wrote that? And we'll just try to like make you think you wrote it.
That's what I'm waiting for, something that I may have written that I don't recognize. We'll see.
It could happen. Okay, let's try our third question here, which is the charisma score is usable to decide such things as whether or not a witch capturing a player will turn him into a swine or keep him enchanted as a lover.
Oh, yeah. This one, whatever reason that's stuck in my head. So, as a quote, but I'm not going to just like be too quick on the draw. Let's see. Here's who does this thing.
All right, 1, 2, 3. What do we got? Yes, everyone's correct. It is 0th edition.
Mike sent me the hand signal.
Yeah. I just remember for some reason, the first time I read original D&D, I picked up this note of like this obsession with like witches. I don't know why that just stuck in my head. It's like, they seems to come up a lot. Plus, I don't know, I think it was just an excuse for them to draw like, hey, we can draw like some topless women in our book justifiably now because it's what we're writing about. Like,
right, because it had like the witch in the Amazon.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Just...
I just find they talked about capturing the player, like newer books. The player character, just the character, keeping him as their lover. Like, oh yeah, this is definitely pre 2E. This is before they're like, whoa, parents get mad. So it's like, okay.
Well, you got to figure back in the 70s, right? You couldn't get that kind of action like an advanced squad leader or Panzerblitz, right? I mean, I'm sure that was part of the appeal of D&D, right? Like,
oh, and then also just the he versus like just a they. So it's like, oh yeah, this is definitely way back when.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, what's neat about that rule is that there wasn't really any mechanics for charisma, right? It was just like vibes. You know, you have like 16 charisma. That's pretty good. We'll just kind of take that into account as to how charismatic you are. You're not making any rolls, but game masters just keep that in mind. There's a funny way to look at it because no one would ever put a mechanic in a game now that you didn't actually roll on or something.
I like the "Are you seduced by a witch" mechanic, like as a whole chapter head.
Chapter 3, Are You Seduced by a Witch?
Also known as charisma.
Save versus swine.
Oh.
Okay, let's see. Number 4. If you decide that sometimes it's okay to fudge a little to let the character survive so that the game can continue, don't let the players in on this decision. It's important to let the players... sorry, let me read that again. It's important to the game that they believe their characters are always in danger. Consciously or subconsciously, if they believe you'll never let bad things happen to their characters, they'll change the way they act.
Mike, are you going to take the fall for this one?
It's my fault. I introduced fudging rolls to D&D. It's me.
I think it's third.
Yeah. This is the first. So, as I was gonna say 5, because that sounds kind of modernish to me. So.
Ooh, very interesting. That is actually 3rd edition.
Oh, well done, Kelsey.
Oh.
Point for Kelsey.
I'm never going to keep a lead now. You guys are just being nice, so.
I think Kelsey currently is in the lead with 4 points. Yeah, that's an interesting one because I was reading through 3E because I hadn't really read it before. I was trying to find all of these quotes. And kind of like a lot of the editions, you get to the Game Master advice and it just starts waffling. But that's true with a lot of the editions where like on one hand, they'll be like, you got to make sure that everything stays in balance. And on the other hand, they're like, but never fudge things for players. And then a paragraph later, but remember to fudge things. And it's like, I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, it is odd because there's always, role-playing games in general, right? In D&D, it's so broad what you can do with it, right? It's like trying to give someone like, here's the one way to play the drums. And you're trying to teach them every type of music you could possibly play all at once without making them think, oh, I don't want to do this. So
yeah, it's probably like never do this unless you do it. And if you do it this way, but never do it. But it's totally okay to do that. You don't even need dice. It's like,
that's a 3rd edition DMG right there. You did it.
Yeah. I mean, it would be really neat to see like a game that, I don't know, tried to break things down into different styles of play. And it's like, if you're playing in this kind of style, then here's how you run the game. And if not, then here's how you do it. Because effectively, that's what things are kind of like right now. There's actually several completely different ways to play D&D. But like, especially if you're a new player, getting that dumped on you might be too much. I don't know. All right. Question number 5. When the player is as concerned about the welfare of an NPC as he would be for a normal player character, that NPC can be treated as a henchman.
That's tricky. Well, it has to be pre-3rd because but that sounds like it doesn't. Did Gary ever talk about being concerned about an NPC ever?
I was about to say, I'm with you, right? The entire
I hadn't considered that. So I'm going to stick to my answer, but I think I'm wrong because Gary never exhibited sympathy.
Well, you were correct, Seth. You are wrong. It was 2nd edition.
Zeb, I knew it.
That was way too caring, right? This is like, I think we're at the point where we realize characters aren't just game pieces, like they could be people. So
it was really neat, to see his rules for, the 2nd edition rules for henchmen are really weird because it's like you have your main character, but you can also have henchmen or like secondary PCs. And when do you get a henchman? There's no rules for it. All it says is that as soon as you care about them enough, they're a henchman now.
Wait, so you're just like, I really care about Thor, God of Thunder.
Right.
Oh, hi. Someone finally cared after 10 years of 1st edition D&D where it was just like I was just a stat block, with this awesome hammer,
There's like that whole meme about the dungeon master crafts this amazing NPC and then all of a sudden the player characters go after some toothless kobold that's eating worms in the corner or something that they just pulled out of their butt at the last second. I think this is the way they're like, okay, guys, we need to metagame this. Do we want that really awesome fighter over there? Yeah, we need to care about them.
Everyone care really hard right now.
Just Care Bear stare right now.
Yeah, and second edition was the edition that got a lot more narrative-y, right? So like how much you care about the NPCs and your relationships to them made more of a difference. Whereas, yeah, in 1E, Gary wouldn't have cared at all. They're just cannon fodder. All right, let's move on to question number 6. Most doors will automatically close, despite the difficulty in opening them. Doors will automatically open for monsters unless they are held shut against them by characters. Doors can be wedged open by means of spikes, but there is a 1/3 chance, die 5 or 6, that the spike will slip and the door will shut.
That's some classic dungeon crawling minutia right there. I'm going way back, guys. Way back for this one.
That's right. It was the obsession with doors. Like,
I'm gonna do advanced.
Going advanced.
Yeah.
It was 0th edition. It's 0th edition. Sorry, Seth.
Seth's making bold decisions, though.
I only have a 1. Actually, it is.
Yeah. you only have the 1 card, right? So,
At least,
I dropped the rest of the 4 minutes ago.
Mine are like mirror flipped, and I'm like, did you draw yours in a mirror? That was so smart.
Has anyone actually tried to use that rule where you actually roll to see if doors get stuck behind you?
I actually tried. It's just kind of a pain because then the entire game becomes like just this game of doors, right? Like, okay, is the door stuck? Does it even matter? And that's kind of where, I mean, I think, a lot of modern games, you don't roll unless it's important, or you only roll if there's consequences. So that's what I kind of found was it was just like, the doors are closing and now we have to roll to see if the door opens. And I get it. Like, the idea being you're getting more potential rolls for wandering monsters, but it just got kind of tedious after a while. Plus, it's just a pain to track. You have your map and you're constantly trying to remember which door is closed. So, I mean, I guess I could see like how it could be fun, but for me, it just felt like I think in a world where the game really was like a draw the map the DM has built, like that's kind of the entire point is just to figure out the map. I think that makes sense, but I think as soon as you're more like in a tactical kind of like story, I guess, like that's probably giving it way too much credit, but just I think it really only made sense when you were really worried about like running out of the dungeon or the dungeon as like this very like specific type of environment that like OD&D seemed to embrace. Like the sample dungeon in OD&D is so bizarre. It's just, here is something that's really hard to map and will confuse you. And it's like, those aren't real, like confusion and frustration are no longer pillars of game design, right? Like at some point they were. It was like, these are the 3 games that are available to you at your local store, and like you're stuck with them. And now it's just you don't see that style of play.
I just found it ridiculous. I have trouble getting doors shut my whole life. Like my parents would get on to me for it. So the idea that they're all automatically closing just always seemed really lame. So I just ignored it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever used it either. But I mean, I can see it in like the labyrinth style of play where like I was looking at the maps for Blackmoor recently, and those maps are crazy because it's literally just like a labyrinth made of like weird diagonals with like occasional rooms. That's the whole thing. So I can see if it was like a mapping game and doors getting closing behind you and then getting stuck again means that like you kind of infiltrate into the dungeon, but then the way out isn't going to be the same way again because all those doors are stuck now. So you have to go out a different way. That's the only reason I can think that they were there, but that would be interesting for those reasons. Yeah. All right, let's go on to question number 7. When a character casts a spell, he or she expends a slot of that spell's level or higher, effectively filling a slot with the spell.
I made my choice.
My hand moved on its own accord. I'm staring at Mike trying to be like, which side of his cards is he going for? And I'm like, Seth, you're just completely poker faced right now.
Yeah, am I going to the bottom or the top? Because I have 0 on the top. So it's like,
oh.
I will also point out that my cards are from the Grand Geneva. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, very nice.
Oh.
All right, I'll be first into the breach. I'm going to say 5e.
I want a 3.
Seth with the wild card. Sorry, Seth, it was 5th edition.
What class was that for, isn't it? Gosh, this is embarrassing, but I'm like, is it like clerics who get to do that in 5th edition?
It's across. I think it's for all the classes. I think that's like in each class, but it's basically the same text. So
It always works that way.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is one of those rules that I wanted to ask Mike about, because it's so interesting, because it uses the terminology of spell slots, which kind of has existed since the dawn of D&D, but like it inverts it, right? Because like in all of the rest of early D&D, at least the way, here's how I pictured it. Like a wizard has like holes in their head, and you get your spells and you stick them into the holes, and then you shoot them out of your holes, right? And then it's just like you're firing your spells out of your brain cannon, right? So like that's what the slots are for. You put the spells in them. But like in 5th edition is the only one where it reverses that, where you cast a spell by filling up the hole.
Yeah. So this is okay. Little trivia this is the spell system from the game Wizardry. If you ever played Wizardry back in 1981, this is how it worked. You had like 3 first level like points, and then you'd have first level spells. And so the idea behind it was to put less pressure on players, especially new players, to figure out like, oh, which spells should I take? Like, should I take, Levitate, or should I take Magic Missile? And then the player feel like, oh, I took Magic Missile and I wish I took Levitate instead, or, vice versa. So the idea was to make it less like put the decision making in the moment of play, so the player could feel more like, oh, I can take a funky spell and a blast spell, and then when we're playing, especially if you're new. So like here's just the big tip for any game designers out there: new players hate feeling dumb. Like they really are like allergic to feeling like I just made a mistake, like because I don't know this game. It's one of the big things that makes people bounce off games when you're trying to teach them. They're very allergic to it. So that's essentially what that was there for, was just to make it feel like you could just kind of take spells that looked cool, and then and it kind of rewards like diversifying your spell list. Because if you have like whatever 8 spell slots and it's a super combat heavy session, you can just keep spamming Magic Missile. That's also why they scale up. So it's like, great, I can just take Magic Missile as my one combat spell, and I'm always like Master Blaster with it, because I can just fire off my highest level slot and just shoot some guy in the face. So yeah, that's a lot of like why that got inverted. The opposite way is really cool if you kind of know the game already, and you can kind of go into a dungeon. I kind of understand what the DM's up to, so I know how to like sort things out.
I for some reason I didn't get that it was like, oh, you fill it after you do it. Oh, because it's like that's total 5th edition, because it's like, man, I like that so much better, because I love the concept, the idea of you write your spell down at the beginning of the day, and maybe today is the day. Spider climb, it's your time to shine. You're gonna save everybody, but probably not. Or like read magic. You're like, yeah. And I love the idea of it when it works. It usually doesn't, but man, that 1 out of 50 games, it was awesome.
Then you look like a genius. You're like, I was so prepared, and I knew what was going to happen here. We were going to fall into an underwater pit trap, and then we all needed water breathing. I am a genius.
Yeah. Yeah. What was really neat is when I started reading The Dying Earth recently, and you see the Vancian magic system in the Dying Earth books, where a wizard literally has a book in front of him, and like Jack Vance describes him reading the book and like stuffing it into his brain, and his brain like holding it, and it's like struggling to get out, and then he like fires it out of his brain, which is really cool. But yeah, it has its downsides. The interesting thing about like the 5th edition magic system is that it's almost like a point-based system. Yeah. Right? But it's called slots instead of points, but they're tiers of points, but it's still kind of a point system.
Yeah, it's the leveling that forces you to kind of approach it that way, just give people the sense of like progression and everything. But yeah, it's a point system where the points are just like these weird bundles, like rather than just being like, you have 10 points and you can spend 4 points in a spell. It's just like you have 10 pools of points. And so yeah, it is a little, there's a reason why people will say they've played Baldur's Gate 3 and the spell system finally makes sense to them, because it is sort of weird, like if you're just looking at it on a piece of paper and trying to figure it out.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see how many people learn D&D from playing Baldur's Gate. I'm curious to see how that shakes out in the future. All right, let's go on to question number 8. Allowing PCs access to prestige classes is purely optional and always under the purview of the DM. Even though a few examples can be found below, prestige classes are idiosyncratic to each campaign, and DMs may choose to not allow them or to use them only for NPCs. Dungeon Masters should use prestige classes as a tool for world building, as well as a reward for achieving high level. They set characters in the milieu and put them in the context of the world.
I don't think there's ever been a bigger gap between stated intent, and actual outcome of any piece of D&D design in the 50-year history of the game.
I'm like, this has to be a trap, right? Because there's only one edition that had this problem, and it was third, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's third edition. Tell us, Mike, what was the conflict here?
Oh, well, so the idea, I mean, and it's funny to think back in 2000 when these things first came out, and they were originally the DMG. And what then happened was everyone decided, hey, this is the edition where optimization is just the rad thing to do. And so it just became multi-classing just, on steroids. Because the idea, I mean, I had, I had a player in one of my campaigns, I think, exemplified this. He was the person who would go through and say, okay, I have a 12th level character who has 3 levels in Rogue and then like 1 or 2 levels in like 8 billion prestige classes. Because essentially what it became was it just went through and dipped out for those specific features. So this great idea of like, oh, it's cool. It's like it represents this organization you can join. It's like, yeah, but this organization gives me this awesome thing at first level. So I'll join, go to a few meetings. Then I'm like, okay, thanks for the secrets. Now I'll go join this other organization. The flavor is just completely stripped away. And I remember working on those things in third edition where like you had to write, like I think the style guide at Wizards at the time was like, it's like 4 to 6 pages of background information on these things. And I hated doing that because I knew the guys who use these things, they didn't care. They were never like, those 4 pages were just a buffer to keep the prestige classes separate so they could just like flip through the book and find them because they were just looking at those class tables. And man, it was. Whew, yeah. I think, thinking of it, the original inspiration may have been from RuneQuest, where you would join like cults and that's how you'd get like certain spells. And it was really important. Like, so if I remember right in RuneQuest, you essentially could get this like really awesome spell, like if you joined this cult, but you couldn't get spell points to cast it unless you like stayed in the cult's good graces. So it's kind of like where it worked. It's like, great, I have this awesome like Thunder Smite spell, but if like the Storm Bowl cult gets mad at me, I will never be able to cast it again. Where this was just like, oh, you can just take all the spells you want and you just use your spell slots to cast them. So go ahead. So yeah, it's just, I mean, I think that happens to every edition of D&D, right? Like, the designers build it and they throw it out in the world and then the community completely does different things with it. Like, I mean, no one working on 5th edition was like, oh, we better think about the streamers. Like, how will this game work for them, right? Like, I wouldn't even know what that meant, right? Like, so.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it's so funny how a system that was clearly designed to enhance world building, right? Having prestige classes, and I assume you would create them for your own world too. You could create your own special prestige classes, was immediately like hijacked to do the opposite. I mean, when I started playing D&D, the first thing I played was Pathfinder 1st edition, and I'd never really played a role-playing game before. And so I was told to make a character, so I just went online, and the only thing was just hundreds of guides to optimizing characters. And so I immediately assumed that that's what you do. That's how you make a character for these games. Yeah.
Mike, did you guys debate whether to allow multi-classing in 5e? Was that like a thing, or was it just like we have to?
It was, for me, it was table stakes. Like we had to, because it was so popular. Even though I think it is, as a designer, it's awful for the system because it forces you to put all this weird extra complexity in the game, so that like, oh, you can't rage while like using sneak attack and like all those things. Like it's just such extra like but it did feel like something that people just expected to have in the game. I mean, the 3E multiclassing is so simple yet broken that it was very hard to like. I think we have to stick like with this simplicity, which was, and even with all the problems it came with, which was frustrating because the 4th edition multiclassing I actually really liked. It was just, you would take a feat that gave you like a bunch of like, say, rogue stuff, and it was like, oh, this is so simple. I can make like my 1st level wizard, and my feat is like rogue multiclass, and so I get like a little conditional sneak attack, and I get some extra skills. And in play, it was great because it's just like, oh, my wizard is sneaky, and if I have to like throw a knife at someone, I can do some extra damage, But the there's definitely people who like the Tinker Toy kind of Lego piece, whatever brick analogy I'm going to use, of character building, and they're a good chunk of the audience, especially for, we talked earlier about you have to kind of write the DMG for every possible DM. In some ways, you're kind of writing the player's handbook for every possible player. So,
all right, moving on to question number 9. When you are dying, you need to make a saving throw at the end of your turn each round. The results of your saving throw determine how close you are to death. Lower than 10, you slip 1 step closer to death. If you get this result 3 times before you take a rest, you die.
Yeah, that's.
I think that's 5th. That's like the newer, because were saving throws against death a thing in 3rd?
They were in 1st and 2nd. We already determined.
Yeah, that was. They just had negative hit points because I think you went down unless you're stabilized. You went down by
you
negative
lose
1 each
some.
round. Yeah.
Oh,
This result is from 4th edition.
4th edition.
This is 4th edition.
We're all wrong.
Oh my goodness! I totally forgot. Wow.
Dang. That is
So
shocking.
did 5e take this from 4e?
Yeah, I mean, almost exactly, and it's hilarious. Like, working on the game like 12 years ago. Yeah, I guess we just totally took it from 4th edition, along with a bunch of other things. People who don't like 4th edition, it's ahead of its time. Like, but wow, that's wild. It's funny because I would have, if you had asked me to describe the death mechanics for 4th, I probably would have said negative hit points. Well, there you go. Like, hey, that
Yep.
Ben, touche.
Yeah, I got you. I got everyone.
Great.
Learn
something new every day.
I discovered all sorts of fun things. I'd never read 4th edition, so just skimming through it, I just kept finding rules like this kind of sounds like 5th edition, and yeah.
Yes!
A couple times I saw that.
This is the theory. I think I may have we may have talked this online or something. It's like sometimes you have to do something twice before an audience will accept it, and there's like so much of like, oh, I'm gonna relive all the memories of 4th edition, right? Where it's like, at will magic, this is unacceptable. You could just like cast like a fire bolt constantly. Like, why isn't everything just constantly on fire? And then 5th edition, okay, here are cantrips. Oh, this is awesome. I can cast fire. Oh, wow, this is the best. It's like, what changed? I don't know, right? It's like...
What changed is that you called it a cantrip.
We called it a cantrip, right?
There you go.
That's true. That's
that
true.
makes it acceptable.
Yeah, now it's acceptable. Like, you can go back.
That's so funny.
Oh.
All right, question number 10. It was initially contemplated to term character power as rank. Spell complexity was to be termed power, and monster strength was to be termed as order. However, because of existing usage, level is retained throughout with all 4 meanings, and it's not as confusing as it may now seem.
Oh, this is a tough one. Because, I don't know. I feel like we have to talk this one out. I do. I'm like, I don't know.
So I think it's got to be early, and it's going to be after people, I could see it being 0 edition, OD&D. But, we already had the one earlier where Gygax was kind of apologizing for the way he was doing things. So, like, that might be a little bit of the strain. Like, they just did it in OD&D, and then people in the zine started complaining. And he's like, I'll show you alarms and excursions. Like, this is, this is what we were going to do, but that was a dumb way to do it. And so it could be, I could see it being an AD&D.
Yeah, and like, did I get a whiff of like apologizing or trying to like explain how they didn't make an IP infraction in here? I feel like that was pre-3rd edition behavior. Like, that was already used somewhere else in another game or something was what I got from that. So,
We all going 1st edition?
Yeah, I think I'm going to say first.
I'm actually going to go second.
Oh, okay.
One second.
Seth, we read each other's mind.
Mike, take this one. It is 1st edition.
Oh my!
It's the Gygax apology tour. It's another
Yeah.
Oh, that was all Dave's idea. Dave wanted to do it that way, but now that Dave absolutely legally did not contribute to this game.
Oh my gosh, yeah. There's like this vibe of shade being thrown by the statement that Ben read. There's like some kind of undertone to it.
See,
yeah,
I thought it was the other Dave Cook going like, "Hey, look, guys, we're stuck with this."
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of that in 2nd edition where it's just like, we really want to change this stuff, but we can't.
Yes.
I have heard stories that the 2nd edition team wanted to do, say, like ascending armor class. Like that was like one of their first things they wanted to do. Like say, hey, armor class starts at 10 and goes up. And they were told no by the business people because they still had a ton of 1st edition stuff in the warehouse, which was literally located right next door to their offices that they still had to sell. So, but if you look at Gamma World 4th edition, I think it's 4th edition. It's the one that came as a softcover rulebook, released like 91. I think Steve Winter worked on that one, and I think a lot of the changes they wanted to make to D&D 2nd edition showed up in Gamma World 4th edition, because that game actually has ascending armor class.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. What he's pointing out here in 1st edition, though, was something that really did bother me when I first started learning like Pathfinder, because I had my character level and then there's also spell levels, but they don't correspond to each other. And that drove me bonkers when I was learning the game. Like, what is going on here? And then there was monsters, but monsters have hit dice, not levels, even though it's exactly the same thing. And that did drive me crazy, but maybe Gary could have changed that back in first. That would have been nice.
Since that was the first I learned, it just made total sense to me. So I'm like, yeah, there's no better way of doing this than this way.
Never shall it change. Yeah.
Let's see. Question number 11 is, as the campaign goes into full swing, it is probable that there will be various groups going every which way and at all different time periods. It is suggested that a record of each player is kept, the referee checking off each week as it is spent.
That sounds like classic AD&D to me, like first edition. Like Gary giving advice about how everyone's going to go. Because he liked to really be like, your players are going to do all this crazy stuff. And it's totally something that you as the DM has to just figure out how to deal with. And it's going to be so annoying and stuff. Like he kind of had that vibe in some of the things he said.
Well, there's also that view, I'm also going to say one, of you have 73 players. You will play 5 nights a week, but you will only have 8 at a time. So we're going to do one time. That way, if Steve leaves the game for a month, their character is not suddenly back 1 month. Where time keeps going, people. So I'm going to say 1.
Yeah.
See, I'm going to go counter. I'm going to say 0, because that to me always felt like the edition where there's 8,000 players playing the game. So I'm going to go on a limb, go against the crowd and say ODD.
Yeah, so this does sound a lot like first edition because that's the strict time records must be kept edition. But this is actually 0th edition. This goes all the way back to the first one.
Oh, man, Mike's starting to win here.
Mike takes the lead with 9 points.
Well, it's, if you look back, there are a few like notes in OD&D about like, you know, like a group of up to 20 people and things like that. Because I mean, just think of the context in which the game was played, right? It was Gary running the game for like half of the population of Lake Geneva. At least that's what it seemed like, you know, the way he would talk about it. So.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, does this call into question then the concept of like strict time records must be kept? Like who actually put forth that idea first? Like that's I don't know. That's interesting. I feel like
it's in 0th and in first.
Yeah. So maybe it's not just only that concept can't just be attributed to Gary. Maybe if it was in 0 as well, you know.
Well, he wrote 0th, so.
Well, I guess he did. Did he work with? I forget which one he worked with Dave on. Now was that the Little Brown Book? That's not 0. He did 0.
I mean, he collaborated with Dave like on the Little Brown Books. I think he wrote all of them.
Yeah,
I think.
Is
that right?
I think so. Like, I'm sure like someone right now is very upset at us for saying this. But I think it was Gary kind of doing a lot of the writing, and Dave did a lot of like the design. You think about the, how like a modern game might be built, where you have your system designer, but then you have like the writer. So
I can't remember which book it was. It was pretty much like, well, Dave pretty much turned in like a cardboard box full of like random notes in no particular order. Then Gary deciphered it all like on the floor like a madman. But I think that was Gary's story for it versus, like all he did was turned in a cardboard shoebox full of random notes. Half of them were on fire. And I made order from chaos. So I think it might have been one of the more Gygaxian leaning histories.
That could be. I don't know. I just read through the first fantasy campaign book that Dave Arneson wrote. And that is just a shoebox full of notes. It's just random papers and stuff that he just like stapled together and published. So I don't know. I mean, Gary kind of did that too. Like that's basically what AD&D is. It's just like a bunch of random ideas Gary had just put into a book and published. I feel like a lot of games back then were kind of like that. Okay. Question number 12 is ultravision is the ability to see radiation in the ultraviolet spectrum, gamma rays, X-rays, etc. Creatures with this ability can see in normal nighttime darkness. That is, they see at night as well as a human can see at dusk because of the continual bombardment of ultraviolet radiation upon the Earth.
I think I remember ultravision being referenced in the Drow series. So is that first edition? Like,
yeah, that's I
think I would say first.
It was the ultravision. There's also the writing flourish of the explain. That is explain again. Like that's a very AD&D construct. So
that's scary. Yeah. That's first edition. Yeah, you're all right.
I can't remember the last time I heard the term ultravision because it was like, oh yeah, Why did you get rid of that term, Mike? Because that's such a great term.
I hate-
Bring back Ultravision.
I blame you.
Greatness. Yeah. No, it's funny, right? I had a similar thing where as soon as Benny said the word, it's like, oh, I'm in the backseat of my family's station wagon, right? It's 1985, and I'm like, Ultravision, this is clearly the greatest vision of all, right? Like, it's Ultra, right?
It's a Japanese superhero vision. So, yeah.
We just need to one up it and introduce like supremacy vision or like an ultimatist like.
That's so funny. I love how like I did actually years ago I did a whole video on like the history of dark vision and how it like changed over time in the editions. And what's so funny is in the early ones, both dark vision, or I guess it was, what was it? Infravision and ultravision were two different kinds of vision, and they were specified in like scientific terms. You could see infrared light or you can see ultraviolet light, which is like really specific and not something that anyone would care about now. But if you're running like a very simulation-y world, then that actually makes sense because you could actually take those things into account as to like what you could see or not see.
Yeah, it wasn't until I was like 30 that I understood the difference between infrared and ultraviolet. So when I was in middle school, well before the internet, I at least had the benefit of Predator had come out. So I don't know how you pre-Predator people did it, but I at least had it's like that movie with Arnie.
Wait, when did Predator came out after AD&D, right?
Yeah, it's like 86.
86,
Yeah,
87.
okay. I was just wondering if it had influenced it. The other crazy thing about Ultravision is it points out specifically that with Ultravision, you can see magic items, which means that every magic item is giving off high energy radiation.
Interesting.
Yeah, like Sting is just like a nuclear reactor going off. It's just like gamma rays flying off Sting at all times. Which is such a fun idea that like everyone who's carrying magic weapons is just getting cancer eventually. They're all like Marie Curie.
Yeah.
Like, take all the magic items away from me. I can't see, you know?
So
like,
the power creep is really just their hulking is what it is.
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh my gosh, it explains everything. They're slowly mutating. Okay. Question number 13. You are reading the key to the most exciting hobby in the world, role-playing games. This is the first line of one of the editions.
Whoa, really?
I think so, yeah. If I remember correctly when I made these notes.
So I don't think it'd be 0 or 1 because I don't think.
oh, they didn't even have that term yet.
Yeah.
and they didn't think anyone in the world was going to be interested during 0th edition. Like, yeah. Oh, that's really tough. I'm stuck between first and second right now.
I'm gonna go out here and say it's based on our last experience with this edition. I'm gonna say 40.
Oh, dang. The one, that's a really,
This is also something I could see someone writing this like in the context of like, MMOs and everything kind of muscling in. Like, no, screw that noise. This is it, right? So that I'm going to limb here.
I'm going to go with that.
I'll do second just because I'm like, maybe they were trying to, repair some bridges by being like, no, we're the best.
It's second edition.
Oh, nice. Good one.
Yes.
Whoa.
That is wild. I love that energy.
Balancing between 4 and 3 is like, well, I grabbed the 4 first. I'll grab the but I never read 4. So anytime I say 4, it's like, meow.
Yeah, it's like it couldn't have been 0 because no one would have known what an RPG is. And even in like first edition, calling it the most exciting hobby in the world is a bit much, right? Because most people just wouldn't have heard of it. But I feel like 2E is like, you're like in the mid 80s. Everyone's heard of D&D. They don't know what it is. And now you're pitching it to them.
Yeah, that's when the real pitches like started to come in, I think, is around that time. The marketing stuff. Yeah.
I like it though. Be bold. This is a great hobby. You should enjoy it, right? Dive on in.
Yeah. All right. Question 14 is, you apply your character's intelligence modifier to the number of skill points gained at each level.
The skill version of the game.
Yeah, that's skill ranks. That's 3.
Yeah, that's 3.
Ooh.
First one with actual skill points.
I was like torn between 3rd and 4th, but yeah.
Yeah, I was for second too. I think 4th had just trained or untrained. I can't remember though.
Yeah, it was the third was the only one with skill points, wasn't it?
I think so. And
Was
inevitably,
Yeah.
every person I taught 3rd to, like if it was their first role playing game, they would always put 1 point into every skill, and they would just like, no, don't do that. Like just like stack them up. Like it's
Yeah. Well, I usually do skill-based games. So I'm like, that's what we call painfully average, suck at everything. Like focus. Don't focus too much. Where like you've got the character, it's like, I am only really good at one damn thing. It's like, yeah, come on. Yeah. So and I was guilty of it too. Like, oh, there's 20 skills and I've got 10 points. Okay, I've got 10 ones.
Okay. Question number 15. Most players enjoy many aspects of the game at different times. For convenience, we define the primary player motivations as types of players: actors, explorers, instigators, power gamers, slayers, storytellers, thinkers, and watchers.
I think I know this one.
This sounds like actually good DMing advice being codified for the first time, which is fourth.
It does
edition.
kind of, yeah.
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 That's like, yeah. That's
Yeah, that's fourth edition. Yeah.
It's solid advice, but it's not the current advice because I don't see this getting said a lot anymore. So, which means it's not the current edition, but it's really good advice.
Yeah, so this is an example of the game kind of breaking down players into player styles, which is something that, people should think about more.
Yeah, and it was kind of like revolutionary.
It had tons of good advice. Like it was just very practical.
Question number 16. Once you know which of the following activities each player in your group enjoys the most, you can tailor adventures that satisfy your players' preferences as much as possible, thus keeping them engaged. Acting, exploring, instigating, fighting, optimizing, problem solving, and storytelling.
Okay, wait a sec now. You just gave us another type. So, okay.
This is a trap. This is a trap.
It's a
Yep.
trap.
Oh,
Another edition with lists of player types.
I know. I almost feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Because I'm gonna say that this sounds like it's like someone who actually read the fourth edition, which is spoiler alert, everyone who worked on fifth, saying, okay, let's just give them the thing they hated, but we'll put it in fifth, and now they'll love it. So.
We're going to take out power gamers because we hate those guys.
Yeah.
Because I noticed that wasn't there.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me how like the list changed from fourth to fifth edition. It's pretty similar, but it doesn't have what does it not have? I guess slayers or fighters. But yeah, power gamers aren't really there anymore.
I think the thinking may have been that people might feel power gamer is, like a slam on somebody. So I think like optimizer was meant to be like the replacement, or slayer, something where it's more the activity rather than the player. So
it's also really funny how certain terms have changed their meanings over the years, where one thing used to be this and now it's not. In the online space, rules lawyers now considered a very positive thing, and it's like, this goes against absolutely everything I feel, but they're like, no, I'd love having rules lawyers at my table. It's not good. So like, maybe it was just kind of like, as terminology changed in everyone's mind, they're like, we have to change it to what we meant that time, but what we mean this time, they're different words.
Definitely.
Rules lawyers are bad. It's an insult.
Question number 17. The number of healing surges you can use each day is influenced by your constitution.
Well, I think the only edition that I recall having healing surges was good old number 4.
Yep.
So I was going to say 3 because I never had 4.
Yeah, it's 4.
And another instance we just called them hit dice in 5th edition, and suddenly everyone loved them.
I know. I was like, that one people really should have seen through, but they,
It may have been Rob Schwalb who figured that out. I think I'm trying to remember that. I know one of the designers. I think it was Rob. Just we hadn't I think he wrote a list of classic D&D terms we had not yet used in the game, and hit dice was the last one. So it's let's just call it hit dice.
Just rename healing surges to hit dice.
Awesome. Okay, question number 18. Consider allowing automatic success on certain checks. Under this optional rule, a character automatically succeeds on any ability check with a DC less than or equal to the relevant ability score -5.
Ooh. That's an improvement over taking 10 and taking 20 in 3rd.
Yeah.
So if you have an ability score of 15, you just automatically pass anything with a DC of 10.
But I don't think that would be, well, as I said, I don't think that would be 4th. I think it's 5th because the 4th math, the DCs go up by level.
Yeah.
So it doesn't quite map. So I'm going to say 5 because 5, it is flatter. So
I'm going to keep on.
Yeah, that was 5th edition.
I should have known.
I knew that working on the mathematical core of 2 editions of D&D would someday come in handy.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any reason why like things like taking 20 and taking 10 didn't go on past 3rd edition?
Oh, new players just... Oh, so one of the really fun things I got to do when I worked on D&D was watch people try to play the game. We literally, like at Wizards at the time, had like one of those rooms with a one-way mirror. And it is wild watching people play a game you worked on. And like, so, and that was, if I remember, like taking 20 and taking 10 were just bizarre concepts. People who weren't super into the game, they would just constantly get it wrong. They'd be constantly confused by it. There'd be constant arguments about it. So I get like in the 3rd edition, like what taking 10 was trying to do. But when it hit players, especially players who were just like, it felt like players either just totally missed those rules and never used them. But as soon as they stumbled across them, like it just made the game really hard for them to play. Like people were constantly arguing, like, I want to take 20. Why can't I? It says in the rules I can take 20. And it just, yeah. So it was one of those things where you could just see in focus groups and people just playing. Like what we would do is we would just get kind of like just like recruit people online or through like ads in the Seattle area to come in and play D&D, and we'd watch them. And yeah, you would just, so like these weren't like completely new players too. These might be people who are like, oh, I play D&D, but I'm not so into it that I'm online talking about it. But they would just like, you could just see just short circuited by, oh, they use it during like they're in combat, they use it. Like I think there was one group that just, I just take 10. So I got a 20. Oh, you hit. Oh, awesome. Guys, just take 10. You can hit them all day because he's whatever. Like, so it was just this very weird, like, yeah, it just completely confused.
I was thinking like, God, how many people got stabbed with a pencil with like someone screaming like take 20? Yeah, so like, that was as a knife fight term. Also, please tell me you guys wore white lab coats when you got behind the 2-way glass. Like it's like, please, like there was just a rack of them. I just had to put one on.
That's so funny. I mean, like I think the take 10 and take 20 rules are really good. Like you can easily add them into 5th edition if you wanted to. It wouldn't affect anything. I can see why it would be confusing for people, though. I just like it. I thought it was neat how it codified the not having to roll for everything.
Yeah.
You know, that is just, it codified the time aspect, right? If it take a certain amount of time and there's no pressure, you just do it. And it was in the rules. But I see that as a problem. I see a lot when I watch people play a lot of D&D is people still roll for everything. And it's really hard to just get people out of that rut.
I was not ready for it when it came out. Coming from AD&D when 3rd edition came out, I wasn't ready. It required, I left and I played a ton of other games and I came back very experienced. It's like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. But like at the time when 3.5 were out, it's like, what is this ridiculous crap? And we went back to first, our 1-2 one. And then like years later, like well over a decade, I came back like, that's pretty tight. Yeah, like makes total sense. I'm sorry about stabbing you, Steve.
The ideal world is just a game master who knows when to make rulings as to when you roll for stuff. But it's hard to do.
It's hard to teach people, right? It's all about timing and tempo and all that stuff and knowing what's important.
Yeah. All right, question number 19. You can call your skills, feats, and class features whatever your character would call them. Lida, the halfling rogue, talks about foot pattern rather than moving silently. So her player writes foot pattern down on her character sheet to stand for the move silently skill. Ember the monk calls her move silently skill rice paper walk.
We've got the iconic characters from a specific edition here, so yeah. I loved them. I love the iconic characters. Oh, I meant 3. Can I take back these 3rd edition? I apologize.
Yeah, it's 3rd edition. I thought that was really cool. I'd never run into that rule before where it just encourages you to totally reflavor all of your mechanics as to whatever you would call them.
I like that rule if it had one thing, which is please write down what the regular name of it is. That way later on when you ask your dungeon master how it works, you have the same vocabulary going on. Because otherwise I say, well, how does my rice paper walk? Well, like, what are you talking about? That's not in the books. So I was like, please put a little bracket under it. The common name and then your name, then it's wonderful.
I'm going to use my kill 2 birds with 1 stone skill. It's like, what?
Okay, final question of the night. We urge you to refrain from writing for rules interpretations or the like, unless you are at an absolute loss. For everything herein is fantastic, and the best way to decide how you would like it to be And the best way is to decide how you would like it to be and then make it just that way. On the other hand, we are not loath to answer your questions, but why have us do any more of your imagining for you?
Loathe. That is some Gygaxian
Yeah, it does have loath in there.
terminology. Yeah.
I'm going to say one because of all the stories of people calling Gygax at home for rules clarification. So it's like, that's not zero. That's a man who has been interrupted during dinner a lot.
See, I'm going to say 0 because this is also a man pre any lawsuits over like who actually is in charge of D&D and what the game actually is. That's my throw of the dice.
Yeah, that's 0th edition.
Oh my.
Yeah. I think the giveaway there is that by first, the change in tone from 0th to 1st is in 0th is just like, why are you asking me about the rules? I'm not in charge of that. Whereas by 1st, it's like, these are the rules. And if you don't follow them, you're not playing D&D. There's like a very strong change in tone between those editions.
That's true. That's the tell.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's two different Garys entirely. It's like a different person as soon as you open up 1st edition.
Yeah. Man, I learned something.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird looking, especially at the stuff that he would write into like magazines and to like newspapers that were interviewing him about like what D&D was, because he gets into that into more detail, and it's like two different people. He turns into a person who is just, he's there to protect the brand, and he's there to make sure everyone buys 1st edition. And if you're using other stuff, then you're not playing D&D anymore. Whereas in 0th, it's like, I'm not in charge of this hobby.
No, and I think that's the arc for a lot of people who find themselves like just doing something because it's kind of cool and like you being creative, you have nothing to lose, so why not just go out there? And then once you have something to lose, it changes, right? Like now you get to start doing the risk calculations and how do you keep what you have and all that. I think it's something that happens to a lot of people who find themselves in that situation, right? That kind of overnight success.
Well, yeah, I mean, between 74 and 79, wasn't 79 when 1E came out? Like, it blew up. Nobody knew this was coming. But we also had all of these other new games popping up. Like, you started having like Tunnels and Trolls and the Fantasy Trip, and the RuneQuest, I think, is already out by then, and a lot of the others. Also, it's like, whoa, hey.
And that's a great point, because they didn't know then that D&D would be as dominant as it is, right? Today, it's like, oh yeah, everything is like everyone, D&D is number one. It's like massively bigger than, anything else. But like in 1970 something, they didn't know that, right? There was no reason to think it would be that way.
And yeah, I think a lot of it was also the Satanic Panic, because man, that was Oprah Winfrey and Donahue were talking about it, and it becomes the household name. Because I have some friends in the UK who asked me once, like, why is everything D&D in the US? Because here it was RuneQuest. So I'm like, really? And I thought about saying, you guys didn't have the Satanic Panic, because that made it the household name. 60 Minutes advertised D&D because, the kids sitting in there as their parents are watching 60 Minutes. So they're talking about this game that like the devil comes out and makes a deal with you and drives you insane. And it's probably like heavy metal music. And the parents are like, oh my God. And the kid's like, oh, hell yeah. Because that was my youth. And they never told me about RuneQuest. So
yeah. I mean, probably another big thing too is that like by the time 1st edition comes out, Gary has hired like 100 people, in order to like run his new empire. That's going to be like the new Parker Brothers. And so it's like, I have to feed all of these people.
Oh yeah. And
I can't just tell people to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
The whatever brothers, like they talked about, like anyone that had their last name was working for TSR.
The Bloom Brothers.
Bloom Brothers, yeah.
Yeah, all the Blooms.
And then they bought a stitching thing, and then they raised a ship out of the lake. I mean, just so weird.
What do I do with all this money? I don't know. Well, awesome. Thank you guys for playing today. Mike did come out as the winner this time with 16 points, a new record for Guess the D&D edition. Thank you all for playing, and everyone check out the comments or the description where I will put all of their stuff where you can go see it. Thanks for playing, everybody.
Congrats, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well fought. Well fought.